For me, the Galilee is home. It's home. It's a home I'm choosing every day. And this very unique atmosphere just completely flipped a year ago. This ecosystem was shattered. 70,000 people have left the area. You know, we were feeling so safe in this communal environment and this natural environment. We didn't even bother locking the doors to the house. And now all of us are locking the doors, taking the keys with us. Most houses aren't even sheltered. 180-degree flip is a lot to process, and we don't know what's going to happen after this war ends. It's going to be a long process of rehabilitation and, as I said before, restitching our communities.
We've been so focused on October 7th that we forgot about October 8th. And that's when Hezbollah, the terror group in Lebanon, began its rocket attack campaign against northern Israel, displacing over 70,000 Israeli residents of the north. And that includes our guest today, Hemdat Salay. She's a resident of Kibbutz Kfar Szold in northern Israel that sits just 5.5 kilometers from the Lebanese border. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I can't imagine the year you've had. You're a mother to two children. They're 10.5 and 9.5. As a mother, as an Israeli living so close to the border, having to run for shelter several times a day with just a mere few seconds, I can't even imagine what that's like. Tell us a little bit about what October 8th and I believe 7th was like for you up there on the northern border.
The best way to kind of explain October 7th for us was the direction we were looking towards. One eye was with our brothers and sisters in the south, where we're starting to understand this huge thing that's happening, the scary thing that is happening, a scenario we all knew would happen to us before it would happen down south. So our other eye was looking towards the north, towards the border. We were waiting for Hezbollah to join. I remember it as a very frightening night where I had to kind of make a lot of decisions, where my kids will sleep, where I will put a mattress between the bed and the door so I can, lean on the door and hit whatever's coming. I don't think there was one adult that night that could actually sleep. And then on October 8th, my kids and I were organizing our bags to put down at the public shelter because our house doesn't have a shelter. Oh. And my kids took their bags down to the shelter, and then there was a message from the head of our municipality saying that anyone that doesn't have to be in the area, please evacuate. We want everyone out. It was the military in the area was also backing this decision. And I remember calling my children's father, who was already with his unit
in reserves,
and asking him. I told him, honestly speaking, I don't really want to leave, but I want to do whatever makes you feel calm and focused on your mission. What do you need me to do now? And he said, take the kids and go. So when the kids came up from the shelter, I just told them, go back down, bring the bags, put them in the car, we're going. And like me, thousands of people have left.
It's such a difficult decision as a mother. Where do you go?
I asked my kids, where would you feel the safest now? We were trying very hard to block the news away, but stress is something you feel in the air. You don't need much information to know that it's not regular times. And one of my kids said that they want to go to their aunt and uncle's house. So I called them and I said, we're coming. And they opened the door. We were there for a week with two other families from the broader family that joined. So we were 4 families in one house. And after a week, we continued to our second stop and not the last one.
And by then, Hezbollah has begun its attack campaign on northern Israel,
Right.
firing hundreds of rockets a day. Just out of curiosity, from your home right there on the border that sits 5.5 kilometers from the Lebanese border, how many seconds do you have to run to shelter?
We're said to have 15 seconds.
15.
15. Sometimes we will hear the explosion before the siren goes off or during the siren. It's not really 15 seconds.
People look at Israel and they say, oh, well, they have the Iron Dome to protect them. They're fine. But the reality is that for those residents in the north, like yourself, the Iron Dome doesn't always protect civilians the way it should.
When rockets are targeted to open areas, then they won't be taken down necessarily. They won't necessarily be taken down by the Iron Dome. And then if you're on the road driving, a simple task, a daily thing you do in your routine, drive from one place to another to get food, to get medicine,
Take the kids to school.
To take the kids to school. We haven't spoken about that yet, but these are moments where we're exposed.
You decide to go to your family. You stay with them for a few weeks, and walk me through what happens for the next few months there.
So after a week with this family, I understood that my kids need to see their father. He was down south, and the only way to see him was if we get closer to him. So for 2 weeks, we stayed in another town down in the desert. I remember one moment that was devastating for me. It was the moment I understood our situation. We were staying in Sde Boker. The kind people there opened this huge area where they collected clothes and cleaned them and folded them and, just come and pick whatever you need. And we came with short summer clothes. The desert by November gets cold at night. I didn't have anything warm for my kids. And I remember going to pick a few things from there, and I picked up a sweater. I was looking at it, and I had this flashback from the Ukraine border just a year and a half ago when I was escorting a refugee woman that just, crossed the border to Poland. We were looking for warm clothes for her, and now I'm on the other side, and in my own country, it was surreal. I remember telling myself, okay, you still have a credit card, drive an hour and go buy clothes. Why are you in this situation? I remember this as a very, very shocking moment. And I think that's when I decided that we're going to give it, I'm going to take another week, understand what I want to do, and we're going to find a more sustainable solution. We're not going to be rolling from place to place.
I think it's the moment where you realize that I'm also a refugee. I'm also displaced.
I'm still having a hard time using the word refugee in this context. I even refuse to use it, but displaced, definitely. And at that point, it wasn't clear yet whether the government will support our evacuation or not. Eventually, it didn't. And for people on the 5-kilometer distance from the border, we had a lot of decisions to make. We're still making them today.
Your kibbutz, even though it sits so close to the border with Lebanon, just 5.5 kilometers, officially it is not considered an evacuation zone.
Right.
And so basically you and the other residents of this kibbutz were basically told by, the authorities, it's up to you. You can stay and live with the hell that is going to be this rocket fire from Hezbollah, or you can leave. Right. But you're on your own. That's so much to carry on your shoulders.
That was the psychological element that gripped me during this year and many of my friends, having to make the decision whether I take my kids away and we find some solution, or we stay with our community. At that point, a month into the war, we were just starting to understand that we were going to be left out of the evacuation zone, and we're going to have to make decisions for ourselves. And these decisions, it's not, if you think about it rationally and simplify the problem, then you can say, okay, here is not safe. Here are safe places. Of course, I'm going to take my kids to a safe place, but we're not calculating in this the fact that there's no financial support. So I have to maintain 2 houses in 2 places. Moving is a big deal. I'm going to have to find schools for the kids, social circles, new social circles. When some of their friends have already, by Hanukkah, it was December, people have started going back because they had no choice. And then again, every person that goes into the kibbutz or leaves the kibbutz kind of puts a mirror to your decision, and you have to stop and, what am I doing to my kids? And I think for me, all through the year, the biggest, what was on scale was my kids' physical security versus their psychological security. And I have to choose all the time.
Tell me a little bit about what it's been like explaining to your young children the situation that's happening, the fact that they're experiencing a war.
I remember that the first months I was working. I think my biggest task as a mother was to keep them away from the news and not letting them understand how devastating the situation was and is. But kids are smart. Kids are very attentive. And I remember sleeping on a mattress. We were staying in a house in Sde. There wasn't any furniture, so we were all on mattresses on the floor. And my son wakes me up at 6 a.m. It was still dark outside, and he says, "Mom, you have to hear my idea. I had this great idea. We stick a bookshelf on the shelter door, and then they won't know it's a shelter." And I was shocked that an 80-year-old could think of such a thing. We didn't talk about the physical invasion into Israel. He wasn't aware of it, but something in his instincts, and I have to say maybe his Jewish DNA kind of understood what's going on.
A huge challenge as a mother. What do you say in those moments?
Truth. You say the truth. There's no point of saying anything else. So we gradually started talking about what happened there. What are our strengths? How can we deal with the situation emotionally, psychologically? And I think at this point, after going back to the kibbutz and having, the war in our body, I think our conversations are very open, sometimes a bit cynical. You have to use humor. There's no other choice.
By now, Hezbollah's daily rocket attacks have only increased. It's only gotten worse. Talk to us about that decision to go back home.
We can't sustain this solution, not economically, but also emotionally. And from a community point of view, I think we stayed very engaged in what's going on in the community, and very active in the joint efforts of the community to maintain itself. But it was very hard being away. It's not a simple transition.
Of course, it's uprooting your life.
Yeah.
Completely. In circumstances that you never could have possibly imagined.
Right.
With 2 small kids who don't understand what's happening. And unfortunately, eventually do.
They do.
They grow up way too fast.
And so it was clear that towards the end of the school year, we were going to go back, and we did. Something about this decision helped maybe provided some quiet in my system, in theirs too. Going back to their friends, to people who understand what they're going through. I know how important it is. I never imagined how valuable a peer group could be. So since we came back, the kids naturally joined, the system, the school system, which is not really working. Their friends. I've been taking on roles in the community.
So yeah, that leads me to my next question, because by July you actually decide to join the kibbutz's civilian security team. In Hebrew, it's the Kitat Konenut.
Right.
For our foreign listeners, the concept is basically these communities around Israel have their own security teams, which are basically made up of residents of these communities, who basically take it upon themselves to guard their neighbors and make sure there's no infiltration. Obviously, after October 7th, the necessity for these security teams became way more important. Tell me a little bit about what it's been like for you, having to be part of this security team, this Kitat Konenut, when at the same time you're having to rely on your community to keep your children safe while you're away guarding the border, guarding the community.
I think for me specifically was a natural move. My resilience builds a lot on my agency. So for me, it was very clear that the more I take upon myself inside the community, the more stable I will be for my children. Technically, it's not easy. Their father is still not here. Most of the care does fall on me, and now I'm, both in the hat of a mother, protecting her children, and one of a protecting team of the community. So it's a lot of work, but we are, in a way, a small ecosystem. We each take the part we can to make sure we maintain resilience and maintain sustainable living in very unstable conditions.
Yeah, I think that we've spoken about this before, but the importance of the strength of community, especially in this moment of fear.
Right. And I think, you just said that, and what came up to mind was Passover, last Passover. There was still this feeling in the kibbutz of, stress, and most families have already come back to the kibbutz, but not, we're still not all families have returned, but the community was slowly growing, but it was still very scary. You could feel we were kind of anticipating something to happen on Passover, and there was this decision for a lot of people that they're not going to leave the kibbutz on the holiday. It was just unthinkable. People outside can't understand our situation. It's just talking about it and bridging the experiences is just too much. And a lot of people decided to stay in the kibbutz, so we decided to have a communal seder. It didn't happen for 30 years in the kibbutz. It was the first time in 30 years that there was a communal seder, and just working on it, cooking for it, going over the Haggadah and editing it to fit the times and to fit the context. It was such a special occasion that in all this fear you had this moment where, okay, we're here and we're doing this. And it was very symbolic if you think about the story we're talking about in Passover, and the fact that this is like a moment of our formation as a nation. And we're sitting and we're doing it.
What are your thoughts on the IDF's current military operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon? Are you worried that things will get worse?
The feeling in the area for many of the residents is a moment of sigh. Like, we have an opportunity to take some air and breathe for the first time in this year. I'm saying it with mixed feelings because we don't want a war, but we also, many of us feel like that's the only way to go back home. So there is some feeling of relief that it's finally happening. We're hoping that it's going to be short and everyone is going to come back safely. It's a very, very big cognitive dissonance to hold both the desire for an action and the desire for peace and safety for the people who are going now and protecting us.
I think it's a weird moment where you realize that the both are so intrinsically intertwined.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
I want to hear from you. Tell me a little bit about some of the daily routines at home, the precautions.
First of all, we have a packed suitcase ready for evacuation. It goes with the kids wherever they're in their home with me or they're home with their father. There's the suitcase. And then there is both the communal shelter or the shelter in their father's house, which is always packed with water and food for long durations of stay. The kids, when their siren goes on, they usually call me. They make sure. It became this ritual. They know that I'm coming, but they have to make sure that I heard it and I'm on my way.
They look out for you also.
Yes, and I think that's for me one of the most devastating situations this war brought, because I'm happy that they can see me and take care of me, but it's too early. It's too early. It should be the other way around.
As a mom and as a female, I almost want to call you a soldier, as a fighter, as somebody that's having to protect her community. If we're going to talk about feminists, I'm really looking at the embodiment of a true feminist here.
Most security positions are still, the men stood up and took these positions, and they're taking their role in the community's safety, but our women, they stepped up as leaders, both in formal positions and in informal positions. And the things that our community was able to create with lack of resources, we haven't spoken about that at all. It's not just the rockets and the physical safety that has been completely shaken. It's the lack of supermarkets and medical care that's available. Now that there isn't any school, most women, but also men, barely work because the kids are at home all the time. It's like this puzzle that you can't work it.
Utter chaos.
Maybe in this chaos there is sprouts of organized spaces that we create for ourselves.
And that's where your community has really functioned like an ecosystem.
And
everyone helping themselves.
Amazing to see teachers and retired teachers teaching the kids inside the kibbutz for even an hour a day, but they're taking on a role. It's not necessarily their grandchildren, but they're pitching in. We have the women who've taken on themselves to create cultural events in the kibbutz and are doing an amazing job to kind of get everyone to volunteer and take part. All the communities in the north are now facing some kind of tear that it's going to take a long time to stitch. I did mention some of the people who haven't come back to the kibbutz yet. Some are not going to. Many people are not going to come back to the north, and it's not only devastating as an individual case, but we can't afford not to have people living in the Galilee. It's not an option, but it's going to happen.
What's it going to take for you to feel safe and like you mentioned, your nervous system to finally calm down?
It's very hard for me to answer this question. I think the actions that are being done now could provide for many of us a feeling of safety, it's never going to be complete. It's never going to be complete. We know exactly what kind of threat we're facing in Lebanon. And after October 7th, something has shattered. So it's not going to be a complete feeling of safety. We are depending a lot on this human resilience and our ability to push aside, worst case scenarios. And we're doing it every day. We're living there, although we know what the potential is.
Hemdat Salay, thank you very much. You drove all the way down from the north today to come here and take part in this interview. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.